it always ends quieter than it began. Not with the crack of pads or the roar of 80,000 fans, but with a sound you can quite describe, the sound of a body realizing it can go on. It's the shuffle of cleats on concrete after the crowd's gone home. It's the way the air feels different when you know the game you've built your life around will never welcome you back. Every player remembers the first time they ran out of that tunnel. The light, the noise, the certainty that this was destiny. But few ever talk about the last time. The last step onto that field when their body betrayed them. The last whisper from a trainer who said, "We'll take a look." The last moment when the adrenaline faded and the truth began to take shape. For some, it's a clean hit gone wrong, a shoulder driven into the turf, a helmet striking at the wrong angle. For others, it's invisible, a ligament snapping, the nerve that stops firing, a heartbeat that suddenly doesn't feel right. The league calls it career-ending. The player just calls it the end. I've spoken with men who can still hear the crowd the moment before it all went silent. They remember the way teammates gathered around, the way the cart rolled out, the smell of grass and sweat, the way the stadium dimmed beneath the weight of uncertainty. And they remember the one question that doesn't leave you. What happens now? In the NFL, glory is a rented thing. It never belongs to you. The league is filled with names we forget. Men who trained their whole lives for a few seasons that ended before their prime. For every superstar who retired on his own terms, there are dozens who are forced out by injury, by pain, by the quiet realization that the body has limits the dream doesn't respect. There, as an old saying in locker rooms, the game retires you before you retire from the game. It's not a metaphor, it's a warning. Behind the trophies and contracts lies a different story. One written in surgeries, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. It's the story of the ones who never got a farewell game, never made a retirement speech, never even knew their final play had already happened. They wake up one morning and the schedule's empty. No practice, no flight, no film to study. The noise is gone, and what remains is the silence, the kind that forces you to confront who you are without the pads, without the jersey, without the Sunday stage. Take the case of Sterling Sharp, one of the greatest receivers of his time. At 29, he was unstoppable, rewriting Green Bay's record books. Then one tackle, one neck injury, and it was over. Doctors said he could walk, but one wrong hit could leave him paralyzed. He never played again. The league moved on, but for Sharp, every highlight replayed like an unfinished sentence. Or Chris Borland, a young linebacker in San Francisco, who walked away at just 24. Healthy, talented, ascending, and done. He said he couldn't ignore the science, the risk, the evidence mounting about what the game did to the brain. The league framed it as an anomaly. The truth was more complicated. He wasn't the first to think it. It's just the first to say it out loud. Some players vanish quietly. Others fade in plain sight. Faces on television panels, their smiles masking chronic pain. They talk about life after football like it's an adjustment. But for many, it's an identity crisis. The sport gave them purpose, validation, brotherhood. Without it, there's a hole no amount of fame or money can fill. The silence after retirement is not peaceful. It sets the silence of a man searching for himself in a world that's already moved on. Some find coaching or business or broadcasting. Others find the bottom of a pill bottle, or worse, the weight of their own despair. The average NFL career lasts barely over 3 years. 3 years. Imagine dedicating your entire life to something from childhood drills to college scholarships, only to see it vanish before your 30th birthday. The league's machine doesn't slow down. New draft picks arrive, new faces take your number, and the fans barely notice you're gone. For every Hall of Famer, there's a dozen forgotten names etched only in medical reports and faded team rosters. They're the ones who gave everything, cartilage, memory, sanity, for a dream that paid them in applause and left them in silence. One veteran told me, "You don't leave the NFL. The NFL leaves you." His voice cracked when he said it. Not because of regret, but because he finally understood what all the veterans meant when they warned him. The game doesn't love you back. Injuries are only part of the equation. There's also the pressure, the unspoken rule that you play through pain, that showing weakness is worse than losing. Players inject painkillers to make it through practice, hide concussions to keep their spot, lie to doctors to avoid the label of fragile. They tell themselves it's temporary. They believe the body will heal. But every hit, every injection, every ignored symptom adds up, until one day, the body refuses. And when that happens, the same system that once glorified your toughness now turns clinical, procedural, cold. You're an injury report, a transaction line, a retirement announcement buried beneath game highlights. When the lights go out, the silence begins, and in that silence, the truth becomes unbearable. You realize how much of your identity was tied to noise. You lived for the roar, the cameras, the adrenaline. Without them, you start to question who you were playing for all along. Some players try to come back. They work through pain, through surgeries, through doubt. But you can't out-train nerve damage. You can't out-rehab arthritis. You can't rebuild trust in a body that's betrayed you. Others accept it, not gracefully, but eventually. They learn that greatness in football, isn't measured by years played, but by the courage to face what comes after. And yet, the fear remains. The fear of becoming irrelevant. Because the NFL doesn't have room for reflection. It celebrates what's next, not what's lost. The cycle keeps spinning, powered by the dreams of young men who believe the LHL be different, that their story won't end like the others. But every generation learns the same truth. The game gives, and the game takes away. The silence after the roar, isn't just the end of a career. It's the echo of everything left unsaid. The apologies that never came. The warnings that went ignored. The bodies that gave more than they had to give. When I walk through empty stadiums now, I can still feel it. The ghosts of ambition. The memories trapped in the concrete. You can almost hear the echoes of those who fell short, not because they lacked talent, but because the game demanded too much. This is their story. The ones who never got to say goodbye. The ones who lost everything chasing a dream that promised immortality and delivered mortality instead. Their names may not hang in the Hall of Fame, but their stories are carved into the bones of the game itself. And in the quiet that follows, we begin to understand what greatness truly costs. They call it the League of Gods, a place where men become myth, where strength looks eternal, and where pain is merely another opponent to overcome. The NFL has built its empire on the illusion of indestructibility of warriors who rise after every collision, who play through pain as if suffering were proof of greatness. But beneath that mythology lies a truth the league rarely speaks of. For every legend who ascends into immortality, dozens more fall quietly into obscurity, their bodies and minds broken long before the world ever learns their names. The NFL glorifies durability, but buries vulnerability. It teases the image of men who cannot be broken until they are. For decades, the league's culture has praised toughness as virtue, transforming injury into spectacle. Coaches call it grit. Fans call it heart. But for the players living it, the line between heroism and self-destruction grows thinner every season. The statistics strip away the romance. The average NFL career lasts just over 3.3 years. That's the hard truth, a lifespan shorter than most college degrees. For running backs, it's closer to 2.6 years. And yet, the dream demands total devotion from childhood. Pop Warner, high school, college, draft day, each level promising the same thing, that the pain will be worth it if you make it to Sunday. But Sundays don't last. More than 78% of NFL players face serious financial stress within 2 years of retirement. 1 in 4 develops symptoms of anxiety or depression. And behind the glittering highlight reels, an unspoken epidemic lingers, chronic pain, addiction, post-concussion trauma, memory loss. For many, the end of their playing days marks the beginning of their suffering. I've seen it in their eyes when they talk about their last game. Some describe it like a death, not of the body, but of identity. Because in football, you aren't just an athlete. You're a brand, a story, a paycheck, a symbol of resilience. When that's taken away, what's left? In 2017, the Journal of the American Medical Association published one of the most chilling studies in modern sports medicine. Of 111 former NFL players' brains examined posthumously, 110 showed signs of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head trauma. The symptoms don't show up immediately. They creep in slowly. Confusion, impulse control problems, depression, aggression, and, eventually, dementia. It isn't just a medical crisis, it's an identity crisis. Because the same game that made them heroes also rewired their brains against them. And yet, the machine keeps turning. Each draft class brings a new crop of dreamers, all convinced they'll be the ones to beat the odds. They don't see the discarded until they become one of them. Take Andrew Luck, a generational talent, a quarterback built for legacy. By 29, he was done. Years of injuries, torn cartilage, lacerated kidney, concussions stripped away the joy of the game. When he announced his retirement, fans booed. They called him weak. But Luck wasn't quitting. He was saving what was left of his humanity. In a league obsessed with sacrifice, choosing survival is seen as betrayal. Then there's Chris Borland, the young linebacker from San Francisco who walked away after one brilliant rookie season, 24 years old, leading his team in tackles with millions ahead of him. He studied the data, the autopsies, the men who'd come before him, and made a decision almost no one in the game understood. He said, "I just didn't think it was worth the risk." The league respected his intelligence, but his departure rattled its foundations. It exposed the quiet truth that awareness could become resistance. And then there are the forgotten ones. Men like Kenny McKinley, a promising receiver whose career ended after injury. Isolated, despondent, he took his own life at 23. Or Mike Webster, the Hall of Fame center whose body and mind deteriorated in public view, living out of his car before dying at 50. The first confirmed NFL case of CTE. His brain became evidence, his suffering the blueprint of what the game could do. The NFL has built protocols and programs in response. Concussion spotters, mental health initiatives, pension adjustments, but the damage runs deeper than policy can repair. This isn't just about medicine, it's about culture. For decades, toughness has been currency. Admitting pain meant risking a contract. Admitting fear meant risking ridicule. Players were told to walk it off, rub some dirt on it, be a man. These weren't cliches, they were commandments. And in that silence, thousands of injuries went unreported. Careers ended not with dramatic collapses, but with quiet decay. Knees that never healed, backs that never straightened, heads that never cleared. I remember one veteran saying, "You learn early that pain is part of the uniform." He meant it literally. Tape it, ice it, inject it, just don't talk about it, guys. In the NFL, silence isn't just survival, it's expectation. The league celebrates legends, the ones who played through broken ribs, concussions, torn ligaments. We immortalize them in highlight reels, documentaries, Hall of Fame speeches. But the wounded, the ones who chose to walk away, are framed as footnotes, as what could have beens. This documentary isn't about those who made it. It's about those who paid for it. You'll hear stories of men whose bodies collapsed before their dreams did. Players who watched teammates carried off the field and wondered when it would be their turn. You'll meet families still fighting for benefits, for recognition, for closure. You will see how the pursuit of glory became a system of denial, one where pain was the price of belonging. The irony is almost biblical. The league that demands godlike strength is built on mortal bones. Every Sunday, millions tune in to watch controlled chaos, to celebrate collisions that feel mythic, not human. But behind every roar, there's a whisper. How long can they keep this up? The truth is, not long. The data has never lied. The human body was never meant for this. The brain, floating in a sea of fluid, was never designed to take repeated shocks at the speed of modern football. Studies show that a single season of high school football can alter brain chemistry. Imagine 10 years in the NFL. Imagine 50,000 hits, each one chipping away at something that can't be replaced. And yet, the mythology persists. Play hurt. Be dependable. Don't let the team down. These aren't just locker room slogans. They're indoctrinations. It teach men to suppress pain until they can't feel it, physically or emotionally. What happens when the cheering stops? When the roar fades and the silence settles in? That's the question the NFL doesn't prepare its players for. The league invests millions in draft combines and playbooks, but almost nothing in transition, in identity, in mental recovery. It's a culture that manufactures heroes and discards humans. I once asked a retired linebacker how long it took for him to stop waking up thinking he had practice. He said, "I still do. It's been 5 years. His body still carries the schedule. His mind still hears the whistle. His dreams still end with the sound of a crowd that isn't there anymore." This isn't a story about failure. It's a story about the cost of a system built on denial. About how the league's obsession with toughness has blinded it to the humanity of its own players. About how some of the brightest talents walked away before they lost themselves completely, and how others never got that chance. From legends like Andrew Luck and Luke Kuechly, two forgotten journeymen who left without a headline. This story is about more than injuries. It's about the silent unraveling that happens when your worth is measured only by what your body can endure. The NFL loves to say, football is family. But for many, family ends when the contract does. When the helmet comes off for the last time, so does the illusion of immortality. What remains is the man bruised, disoriented, uncertain, and the realization that in the League of Gods, every hero eventually falls to earth. And that's where our story truly begins, in the aftermath, in the spaces where fame can't hide the scars, and where the silence after the roar finally demands to be heard. It happens in an instant. The field, alive with noise and velocity, becomes a place of stillness. The crowd that moments ago roared now gasps, frozen between disbelief and dread. I remember the sound before the silence, the pop, that small but unmistakable punctuation mark that splits a life in two. For one player, it was the ACL that went first. For another, a cervical disc compressed just enough to turn movement into memory. In the NFL, they say you never hear your last play coming. But for those who've lived it, the final snap is never just a play. It's a reckoning. The story of early retirement almost always begins here on the turf, surrounded by teammates kneeling in prayer. Medical staff rushing in, cameras cutting away. Beneath the spectacle of the game, there's a deeper choreography. The trainer's whispered diagnosis, the weight of the face mask being unbuckled, the realization in the player's eyes that something's gone terribly wrong. Most fans see the replay. They see the collision, the replay angle, the get well soon post. But what they don't see is the private moment that follows. A grown man lying in an MRI machine, trying to remember when his body stopped listening to him. Let's start with Ryan Shazier. December 4th, 2017. Monday Night Football. A play designed to stop a short gain over the middle turns into a moment that would define the rest of his life. Shazier lowers his helmet into a tackle routine. Instinctive, the kind of play he'd made hundreds of times. But this time, his head hits the receiver's thigh at full speed. His body goes limp before it hits the ground. He can't move his legs. He tries to roll over, but nothing responds. In the minutes that follow, the stadium feels airless. Shazier's eyes are open, but fear replaces fire. The stretcher comes, the cart rolls, and an entire season holds its breath. What followed wasn't the story of a football injury. It was the story of identity breaking apart. The Pittsburgh Steelers linebacker, once defined by his speed and ferocity, was suddenly introduced to the fragility of being human. For months, he learned to walk again. Every movement became a reminder of what had been taken and what remained. The league praised his courage. Fans celebrated his recovery. But behind the headlines, Shazier's life had shifted into a new dimension, one where the game no longer defined the man. That's the anatomy of a career-ending injury. It's not just about torn ligaments or broken bones. It's the psychological fracture, the split between who you were and who you must now become. The injury is the visible wound. The retirement that follows is the invisible one. Statistically, the NFL knows this story too well. Between 2010 and 2020, nearly 2,000 players were placed on season-ending injured reserve. Many never returned. The league's own data shows that the average career lasts just 3.3 years. Even shorter for running backs and special teams players, the disposable labor of America's most profitable sport. Each year, a few make the headlines. But hundreds vanish quietly, cut during rehab, released before training camp, or told their roster spot had to go younger. Take Zach Miller, tight end for the Chicago Bears. In 2017, he caught what appeared to be a touchdown against the New Orleans Saints, until his leg folded underneath him at an angle no human joint was meant to endure. The ligament damage was so severe that surgeons nearly had to amputate his leg. He never played again. In interviews later, Miller spoke softly about gratitude, about being alive. But beneath his composure was the quiet devastation shared by so many. The abrupt loss of the only identity he'd ever known. And yet, these men rarely let the cameras see the fear. They talk about faith, about perspective, about being thankful for the game. But when the crowd fades, the silence settles in like dust. The phone stops ringing. The team's medical staff moves on. The coach checks in once or twice. Then the reality sets in. You're no longer on the roster. You're no longer essential. In that silence, something else begins the reconstruction of self. But it's not easy when the system isn't built for healing. The NFL's Disability Benefits Program, notorious for its complexity and low approval rates, has left countless players fighting bureaucratic battles just to prove that their injuries were football-related. Imagine that. The same league that measured every yard of your body for performance. Suddenly, requiring proof that your broken spine came from the job they paid you to do. This isn't just about physical pain. It's about emotional isolation. A study by the Harvard Football Players' Health Study found that nearly 50% of retired players reported chronic pain that limited daily activities, while over 60% experienced symptoms of anxiety or depression. The physical toll doesn't end with the last snap. It evolves into a lifelong echo. For some, it's a limp. For others, it's the nightmares of reliving that moment on the field. The sound of the crowd fading as their career fades with it. When you talk to those who've lived through it, there's a pattern: denial first, then grief, then an attempt to rebuild. The first stage is always hope. I'll come back stronger. But behind closed doors, doctors whisper hard truths. Ligaments that will never fully heal. Discs that can't take another collision. A heart that might not survive another adrenaline surge. And then comes the meeting. Short, polite, devastating. We're moving in another direction. It's not said cruelly, just mechanically. That's how the NFL survives, by keeping the machine running, even when the gears break. Consider Eric LeGrand, the Rutgers defensive lineman paralyzed in 2010 during a kickoff tackle. His story became one of triumph and courage, and rightfully so. But what it revealed, more than anything, was the fragility of the entire profession. 1 millisecond of bad geometry, and the dream collapses. The speed, the violence, the impact, all of it wrapped in the illusion of control. But the truth is, Every player who steps onto that field is gambling with the rest of their life. In those seconds between the hit and the stretcher, something unspoken happens. Every teammate watching feels the tremor. Every player knows that tomorrow it could be them. But they return to the game anyway, because that's what the culture demands. Play through pain. Be tough. Don't show weakness. In a league that glorifies sacrifice, injury is treated like shame. That's what makes the final snap so haunting. It's not just the end of a career. It's the death of a certain kind of faith. Faith that talent can overcome fragility. Faith that effort guarantees longevity. Faith that the league will take care of its own. For some, the final snap is just a memory they relive on bad nights. For others, it's a moment that redefined every breath that followed. In the end, the anatomy of a career-ending injury is both physical and existential. It's a rupture in the body and a rupture in identity. The man who walked into the stadium that morning never leaves it the same way again. And for every headline about a miraculous recovery, there are countless untold stories of quiet endings. Men who left the field under the stadium lights, swallowed by the machinery of a game that doesn't stop for anyone. The truth is, the NFL doesn't have a retirement age. It has a breaking point. They call them contracts, words printed in elegant type, wrapped in the language of security. Guaranteed money. Long-term deal. Signing bonus. For a player, those words feel like permanence. Proof that their sweat and sacrifice have finally been recognized. But the truth is darker. The NFL's promises for all their ceremony are often written in sand. When the body breaks, the fine print comes alive. What was once a commitment turns into a clause. What felt like family becomes negotiation. Every player signs believing they've made it, that the paper they hold will outlast the pain. But deep inside those pages, the league and its teams have built an escape hatch. Injury settlements, non-guaranteed salaries. Conditional guarantees based on roster status, not recovery. That's the real game beneath the game. A billion-dollar industry designed to protect the shield, not the player. Take the case of Nick Collins, the Green Bay Packers All-Pro safety. In 2011, he suffered a devastating neck injury against the Carolina Panthers. Doctors told him the truth. Another hit could paralyze him. The Packers front office told him another truth. His contract, once worth millions, would be voided if he couldn't pass a physical. Collins wanted to keep playing. The team couldn't take the risk. His $22 million deal dissolved overnight. When he retired months later, the media called it the right decision. What they didn't say was that it was also the only decision the business would allow. Or look at Dez Bryant, once the centerpiece of the Dallas Cowboys offense. In 2018, he finally got another shot with the New Orleans Saints, a one-year, $1.25 million contract. On the third day of practice, his Achilles snapped. The ink on his deal was barely dry. His salary disappeared instantly. Bryant's contract, like most in the league, only became guaranteed if he made the active roster. One bad step, and it was gone. Years of training, public redemption, and personal investment, all erased by a single clause. That's the secret the NFL rarely explains. Most player contracts aren't guaranteed. Unlike the NBA or MLB, where deals ensure long-term security, NFL contracts are conditional by design. Only about 30% of the average contract value ever reaches the player's pocket. The rest evaporates when injury, release, or failure to perform enters the conversation. Behind the scenes, team lawyers and agents speak in coded language: upfront cash, cap-friendly, injury offset. But for the player, it means one thing: you're disposable. The average NFL player who suffers a serious injury before their third season sees over 80% of their expected income vanish. And while teams are protected by insurance, the players themselves face a maze of red tape that often ends with denial. Chris Borland knew this before it broke him. The San Francisco 49ers linebacker shocked the league in 2015 when he retired after just one standout season. His reason? The long-term effects of head trauma weren't worth the check. Borland returned most of his signing bonus, over $600,000, because he felt it was the right thing to do. Yet what he exposed was chilling. A system where walking away on your own terms costs you everything, but being carted off the field earns you nothing more. The business of football has perfected the art of appearing humane. Teams release carefully worded statements. We wish him the best in his recovery. He'll always be part of the family. But those words are ceremonial. The medical staff moves on to the next man on the depth chart, and the player's access to facilities, trainers, and insurance often ends the moment he's released. Many don't even realize how fragile their benefits are until the paperwork arrives. A termination letter paired with a COBRA notice, explaining how to pay for your own healthcare out of pocket. For years, insurance battles have defined the post-injury landscape of the NFL. When players file claims under the disability plan or the line of duty disability benefit, they're met with one consistent response: insufficient evidence. The same league that records every play, every hit, and every concussion protocol somehow finds ambiguity when responsibility becomes financial. A 2019 report from the Washington Post revealed that over 60% of former players who applied for league disability benefits were denied. Many of those denials came even after doctors, including those hired by the NFL, confirmed permanent impairment. It's a quiet scandal, buried under the glamour of Sunday broadcasts and draft day spectacles. And then there's the collective bargaining agreement, the CBA, often hailed as the player's shield. In reality, it's a compromise written in fine ink. While the union has fought for minimum salaries and concussion settlements, the real power still rests with ownership. They control contract structure, guarantee language, and, ultimately, the definition of injury. If a player is hurt during training camp but not yet listed on the official roster, the team can classify it as non-football related, even if it happened on their field. That single phrase can strip a man of millions. Ask Reggie Brown, the former Detroit Lions wide receiver. In 1997, a tackle left him motionless on the field, his spine compressed. He never played again. Brown had signed a multi-year deal, but when doctors declared his condition career-ending, the team terminated his contract and offered an injury settlement far below its total value. Years later, he described it bluntly: "They paid me to disappear." And that's the phrase that lingers: paid to disappear. Because that's how the league protects itself. It doesn't erase players through malice. It erases them through paperwork. It's not personal, it's procedural. The broken promises aren't loud. They're buried in clauses, in the spaces between legal lines. Players often try to fight back. Some file grievances through the NFLPA. Others take their battles to court. But most run out of time, money, or emotional strength long before justice arrives. The NFL has entire legal departments devoted to managing injury claims, while players, newly retired and financially uncertain, face mounting bills. It's an unequal fight. One side armed with resources, the other with memories. Every once in a while, a case pierces the veil. In 2022, former NFL fullback LaRon McClain spoke openly about the toll of his injuries and the bureaucratic maze that followed. "We gave our bodies to the game," he said, "and now they act like we're strangers." His words echoed the sentiment of hundreds. Men who had done everything asked of them, only to discover that loyalty in the NFL is conditional. Behind every career-ending injury headline, there's a financial obituary written in small print. A player tears his Achilles, and the fans say, he'll bounce back. But the truth is, the accountants have already recalculated the cap space. The business moves faster than the human heart can process loss. And yet, even knowing this, every rookie still signs the dotted line, because for them, the promise of playing even briefly outweighs the threat of being forgotten. They tell themselves they'll be different, that they'll beat the odds that their body will hold. But in the NFL, the line between wealth and ruin is thinner than a ligament. In the end, the broken promises isn't just about contracts, it's about the illusion of security. The paper that was supposed to guarantee dignity becomes the tool that strips it away. Players learn that their worth expires the moment their body does. And when the system closes its doors, all that remains are the echoes of a dream built on trust, and trust turned into leverage. Because in this league, the game never stops for the broken. It simply replaces them. There is a certain kind of silence that doesn't come from a crowd. It comes from the inside, from the places in the brain that used to be whole, now flickering like dying lights. In the NFL, they called it getting your bell rung. For decades, it was treated like a badge of honor, a sign that you played hard, that you were tough enough to shake it off. Trainers used to flash fingers, ask how many you could see, and if you got close, you were good to go. But the truth is, every time a player stood up too quickly after a hit, dizzy and disoriented, something inside his head shifted in a way that could never truly shift back. I remember the stories of players who woke up in the middle of the night, not knowing what city they were in. Men in their 30s forgetting the names of teammates they'd shared locker rooms with. Men in their 40s losing track of their children's birthdays. And by the time the world began to understand chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, it was already too late for hundreds who had built the game's empire on their bodies and their memories. The NFL's history with concussions is one of denial, deception, and delayed truth. For years, the league's Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee, formed in 1994, assured players and the public that concussions were minor, recoverable events. They published papers claiming no long-term effects, even as former players were collapsing under the weight of their own minds. It wasn't until Dr. Bennett Omalu examined the brain of former Steelers center Mike Webster in 2002 that the world finally had a name for the disease that had haunted football for generations. Mike Webster, Iron Mike. He played 17 seasons, the last of them in unbearable pain. When his career ended, so did his sense of self. He lived out of his truck, confused, paranoid, sometimes tossing himself to sleep because his body refused to rest. After his death at 50, Omalu's autopsy revealed a brain scarred by repeated trauma, a pattern of degeneration that mirrored dementia but arrived decades too early. It was the first documented case of CTE in an NFL player. What Omalu found should have changed everything. Instead, it ignited a war. The NFL tried to discredit his research, question his credentials, and protect its billion-dollar image. League doctors published rebuttals suggesting Webster's decline was due to lifestyle factors, not football. But one by one, more players died, and more brains told the same story. Terry Long, Andre Waters, Jr., Dave Durson, Vincent Jackson, Demaryius Thomas. Their bodies gave out years before their time, but their minds had been fading long before that. For those still living, the symptoms come slowly, like fog rolling in. Memory loss, mood swings, depression, impulsivity. A man who once commanded a huddle can't remember his own address. Another, once the face of a franchise, now locks himself in dark rooms to escape the noise inside his skull. For many, the worst part isn't the pain, it's the confusion. The sense of being present in a life that no longer feels like your own. Studies out of Boston University SCTE Center have confirmed what players always suspected. The disease is progressive, incurable, and devastating. By 2023, researchers had examined the brains of over 376 former NFL players. 345 of them showed signs of CTE. That's over 90%. And that number doesn't account for the living, the ones still suffering without diagnosis. Still being told by doctors that their anxiety, rage, or forgetfulness are just part of aging. The league has since acknowledged the link, but only after decades of litigation and public pressure. The NFL concussion settlement, finalized in 2016, was supposed to provide financial relief to affected players. Yet even that came with limits. Payments were reduced for older retirees, claims were often delayed or denied, and most controversially, the league initially used race norming to assume black players started with lower baseline cognitive scores, making it harder for them to qualify for compensation. It took public outrage and lawsuits to abolish that practice in 2021. Behind every statistic is a life unraveling. Demarius Thomas, just 33, was found dead in 2021 after years of seizures and memory lapses. Posthumous testing confirmed CTE. His mother said he'd begun forgetting conversations, withdrawing from friends, losing the spark that once defined him. He was just ... gone, she said. For many families, that phrase repeats like an epitaph, gone even before death. But the real cruelty of CTE isn't only biological, it's cultural. Because for generations, the NFL glorified pain. The hardest hitters became legends. The most violent collisions became highlight reels. Men were praised for walking back onto the field seconds after concussions that would have sidelined them for weeks in any other sport. The warrior culture of football made vulnerability a sin and self-preservation an act of betrayal. That's why players hid symptoms. Brett Favre admitted to having thousands of minor concussions over his career, but said he never thought of them as serious. Steve Young once described getting hit so hard that he couldn't remember his own plays, yet he refused to sit out because he feared losing his starting job. These weren't anomalies. They were expectations. It wasn't until the suicides began, until the letters were left behind, that the facade cracked. Junior Seau, linebacker, Hall of Famer, shot himself in the chest in 2012, leaving his brain intact for study. Dave Durson, another former star, did the same. Both were later diagnosed with CTE. In their final notes, they asked that their deaths serve as evidence. Their sacrifice, one last time, for the truth. Today, players have concussion protocols, independent neurologists, and mandatory evaluations. But the question remains, can you make a violent game safe? The helmets are better, but the brain still moves inside the skull. Every hit, even when legal, rattles the mind. Every tackle, every blindside block, chips away at the very organ that makes these men who they are. And the tragedy is that the damage often begins long before the NFL. Studies have shown that children who start tackle football before age 12 are at greater risk of cognitive decline later in life. By the time an athlete reaches the pros, his brain has already endured hundreds of subconcussive blows. The league didn't invent the problem, it perfected it. When you talk to retired players about their memories, they describe it like watching a film of their own lives, but with missing scenes. Some remember the roar of the crowd, but not the outcome of the game. Others recall injuries vividly, but not the birth of their first child. There's a wordless horror in that, to be celebrated for your physical power, only to lose your most human gift, memory. Even now, as the NFL markets its commitment to safety, the past hangs heavy. Lawsuits, settlements, awareness campaigns, all built on the bones of those who didn't live long enough to benefit from them. The game has evolved, but the echoes remain. Every Sunday, when helmets collide and the crowd erupts, there's an invisible ledger being written inside someone's skull. The concussion crisis isn't just a medical story. It's a moral one. It forces the question no league wants to ask. How much of a man's mind is worth our entertainment? And when that mind fades, when he no longer remembers the price he paid, who carries the guilt? For many, the answer never comes. The players fade from the spotlight, their names spoken only in past tense. Their bodies once worshipped, their minds now forgotten. But beneath the glory of America's game lies the truth no fan wants to face, that every tackle carries a shadow. Every victory is written on the fragile fabric of memory. 'Cause in the end, the most dangerous collision in football isn't body against body. It's man against himself. There's a point in every player's life when the pain stops being temporary. At first, it's just soreness, a stiff shoulder, a bruised hip, a dull ache that fades after the next game. But somewhere along the line, the body crosses an invisible threshold. Pain becomes a companion. No longer a signal of injury, but a constant state of being. That's when the pills begin to matter. They start small. A few Toradol shots before kickoff, maybe a Percocet after. Trainers move quietly through locker rooms, dispensing little white pills into paper cups. There's no ceremony, no conversation about dosage or consequence. Just trust. The player trusts the staff trusts the system, and the system trusts that no one will ask questions. By the late 1990s, pain management in the NFL had become an art form. A study later revealed that nearly 70% of retired players admitted to using prescription painkillers during their careers, and more than half said they misused them. In some locker rooms, the team doctor's bag was as essential as the playbook. The players didn't call them drugs, they called them tools. Terry Totolo, a linebacker from the 1980s, was one of the forgotten ones. After years of collisions, surgeries, and cortisone injections, he left football broken. His body couldn't adjust to normal life because pain had become normal. When he could no longer afford refills, he turned to the streets. For years, he lived homeless in Los Angeles, trading stories of the NFL for shelter and food. His fall wasn't because of weakness, it was because he had learned too well how to hide pain. Behind the image of the modern gladiator was an industry designed to keep men functioning. Pain was never seen as a warning. It was a problem to solve before kickoff. Toradol, Vicodin, OxyContin each had its place in the unwritten rulebook of survival. By the 2000s, investigative reports began uncovering what players had whispered for years, that some teams ran medication programs so extensive they resembled hospital wings. One former team physician told the Washington Post, "If you were upright and breathing, you were playing." But what the league framed as resilience, players later recognized as dependency. When they retired, the access stopped. The prescriptions vanished. The pain didn't. What followed was withdrawal, both physical and existential. The body craved chemicals, and the mind craved purpose. Without either, many players spiraled. Keith McCants, a first-round pick in 1990, once said, "I was given painkillers like they were candy. Nobody asked if I was okay. They asked if I could play." By his early 40s, McCants was bankrupt, addicted, and clinically depressed. He spoke openly about the pills, the depression, the regret. In 2021, he was found dead at 53, an overdose. This was the dark alchemy of professional football. The same drugs that extended careers also shortened lives. And it wasn't just the stars. Practice squad players, backups, special teamers, men who barely saw the field were all part of the same quiet machinery. They numbed themselves to keep a paycheck to chase one more Sunday. Team doctors operated in gray zones where medical ethics blurred under competitive pressure. Players signed waivers, acknowledging risk, but how much could an athlete truly consent to when his livelihood depended on staying on the field? Some lawsuits argued that players were misled about the dangers. Others alleged pills were handed out without records, without explanation. In 2014, a group of former players filed a class action lawsuit claiming NFL teams routinely distributed controlled substances illegally to keep athletes playing. The suit was dismissed, not because the stories weren't true, but because they were considered a labor issue, not a criminal one. The deeper tragedy was how this culture shaped identity. When your worth is tied to toughness, admitting pain feels like betrayal. Players learned to say, "I'm good," even when they weren't. They became actors in their own deception, convincing coaches, fans, and themselves that their pain was under control. Until the mask cracked. In 2010, former offensive lineman Jason Skukanek described his mornings this way. "I'd roll out of bed, and my feet wouldn't hit the floor right. I'd take a handful of pills before I brushed my teeth." Years later, he said, quitting football was easier than quitting the medication. And yet, for every player who spoke out, dozens stayed silent, bound by pride, fear, or shame. Painkillers blurred more than just physical sensation. They blurred time, memory, and identity. Players forgot when the injuries began and when the pills stopped helping. What started as recovery became ritual. There's a phrase often used by former athletes: functional addiction. It means you can play, train, raise kids, even smile for the camera, all while medicating every hour of the day. Many didn't even recognize their dependence until it was too late. They thought addiction was something that happened to other people, not to men who'd once worn helmets and stood under the lights. By the time the NFL tightened its policies and introduced stricter oversight, the damage had already rippled across generations. Former players, stripped of insurance and steady income, faced withdrawal without medical help. Their bodies ached for the drugs that had once been prescribed in abundance. Some sought street opioids to fill the void. Others found themselves in rehabilitation centers, their names buried under headlines that read like cautionary tales. The denial wasn't just personal, it was institutional. For decades, the league dismissed claims that its medical culture encouraged addiction. It took congressional hearings, whistleblowers, and a wave of public lawsuits to bring accountability. Even then, most settlements came without admissions of wrongdoing. But numbers never tell the full story. Behind each statistic is a man staring at a bathroom mirror, counting out pills, wondering how much longer he can keep pretending. Behind every lawsuit is a family watching someone they love fade away, not from the sport itself, but from the ghost of it. Pain in the NFL was once considered proof of manhood. To admit it was to surrender. But in the years after retirement, many players learned that denial was the real defeat. Some, like Randy Grimes, a former Buccaneer center, found redemption through recovery programs for ex-players. He now runs outreach initiatives to help others break the same cycle. His words cut through the silence left by decades of secrecy. We played through pain because we didn't know any other way. Now we have to learn how to live through it. That's the cruel paradox of this game. The stronger they appeared, the weaker they became. Painkillers masked the suffering long enough to make it invisible. Long enough for everyone else to believe the myth that these men were indestructible. But pain always collects its debt. And when it finally comes due, it doesn't just take a body, it takes a soul. They say the game is about glory. But for many, it's really about survival, and money is supposed to be the reward for the pain. For the hits that rattle the spine, the surgeries, the nights when the body trembles uncontrollably from inflammation. The paycheck is framed as compensation. Yet what most never see is how quickly that money vanishes, how the myth of wealth in the NFL collapses under the weight of reality. At draft time, dreams are wrapped in dollar signs. Cameras follow the first-round picks, the handshakes, the tears. The contracts sound like lifetimes of security. For years, 10 million, 20 guaranteed. But peel back the numbers, and the truth is stark. The average NFL career lasts less than 3.3 years. Nearly 78% of players find themselves in serious financial distress within just 2 years of retirement. The illusion of wealth lasts longer than the money itself. Consider Vince Young, once a first-round pick and a national champion. He signed a contract worth $26 million guaranteed with the Tennessee Titans. By 2014, he was bankrupt, not because he was lazy or reckless, but because the infrastructure around him was designed for excess, not stability. Between financial advisors, agents, and an entourage of dependents, he was bled by 1,000 small cuts. At one point, reports said he'd spent $5,000 a week at chain restaurants, picking up tabs for entire rooms of strangers trying to live the myth of success the NFL sells. That myth is powerful. The idea that money equals freedom, that every Sunday check ensures a future. But the checks stop. The bills don't. When the stadium lights go out, endorsement deals vanish. and the body that once earned millions now struggles to get out of bed. The real danger isn't just overspending, it's the expectation of permanence. Players are told from rookie camp onward that they've made it, but few are told how quickly it can all end. Financial advisors, some vetted by the league, often use players' ignorance against them. They steer investments into higher-risk schemes or collect quiet commissions. When players are cut or injured, they discover their portfolios are built on air. Ray Lucas, a former Jets quarterback, once said, "When the check stopped coming, I looked at my bank account and thought, what the hell happened?" He'd earned over $1 million in his career. Respectable, stable, but medical bills, divorce, and addiction hollowed it out. Within 2 years, he was living on borrowed money, ashamed to tell his family that the man on TV was now struggling to buy groceries. The culture doesn't forgive the fall. Fans see players as millionaires even after the game leaves them broke. Pride stops many from asking for help. Some sell their Super Bowl rings, others auction jerseys or helmets, relics of a former self. That humiliation becomes part of the unspoken trauma of retirement. A financial advisor once compared the life cycle of an NFL career to a high-speed crash. They go from zero to rich in a year, and back to zero in 2. The system gives no time to adapt. Players enter young, often straight from college, with no financial education and every social pressure imaginable. Families lean on them. Old friends appear. Communities expect them to give back. They become banks and cleats, lending money, buying homes for relatives, sponsoring charity events they can't afford. And when the injuries come, the safety nets fail. Insurance plans cover only a fraction of surgeries. Pension eligibility often requires 4 years of credited service, leaving many who were cut or sidelined 1 season short. Disability claims are notoriously difficult to win. Some players file for aid under the NFL's line of duty or total and permanent disability programs, only to be denied repeatedly. The message is brutal in its simplicity. Once you can't play, you're not the league's responsibility anymore. For many, financial collapse isn't just about mismanagement, it's about identity loss. The money represented validation. Losing it feels like erasure. Financial ruin becomes the visible scar of a deeper wound. The realization that the game didn't love them back. Take Bernie Kosar, once a Cleveland Browns legend. After earning tens of millions, he filed for bankruptcy in 2009. He blamed bad investments and betrayal by those he trusted. He later revealed a darker truth. Cognitive decline and lingering pain from years of hits had clouded his judgment. He wasn't just losing money, he was losing himself. There's a haunting uniformity to these stories. A cycle of fast wealth, blind trust, physical breakdown, and slow isolation. Some find redemption. Others, like wide receiver Titus Young, spiral beyond repair. Young's mental health deteriorated rapidly after early retirement. His savings vanished, and he faced repeated arrests. His story wasn't unique, it was just public. The financial system surrounding football thrives on silence. Players are discouraged from questioning contracts or challenging team doctors. Agents push for bigger deals, not smarter ones. Financial advisors sell optimism like a drug. And through it all, the message remains the same. You're lucky to be here, but luck doesn't last. In 2012, a study commissioned by Sports Illustrated found that nearly 80% of former NFL players were either broke or under financial stress within 2 years of leaving the league. That number has barely shifted since. Behind the headlines of billion-dollar TV deals and record-breaking contracts lies a silent epidemic of financial collapse. The league's player engagement programs have tried to address this: seminars, mentorships, life skills courses, but education can't undo a culture that rewards impulse and punishes vulnerability. How do you tell a 23-year-old with a $10 million contract that he might be broke by 30? How do you teach long-term thinking in a profession where the average snap could be your last? And when the money finally disappears, so do the people. Friends fade. Agents stop calling. the team doctor no longer picks up the phone. The same crowd that once called your name now walks past you in the airport, unsure if it's really you, the former star, the ex-player. For many, the first real silence comes not in the locker room, but at the bank. A card declined. A mortgage payment missed. Realization that the glory was leased, not owned. Some players recover through humility, discipline, and often sheer luck. Others find purpose in coaching, business, or activism. But many fade quietly. Their names remembered only on trading cards or injury reports. They were rich once. They were gods once. Now they live among us, limping reminders that even millions can protect you from the end. Football gave them fame. It took their health. And when both were gone, the money followed. This is the part of the NFL no one wants to advertise: the postscript after the touchdown, where the roar fades, and a man is left alone with his bills, his pain, and his memories. The hardest part of leaving football isn't the injury. It isn't the money, the surgeries, or even the pain that lingers in the mornings when every joint screams. It's the silence that follows when you can no longer say the words, "I'm a football player." That phrase carries a lifetime of meaning. For most who make it to the NFL, it isn't just a job. It's a language, a faith, an identity shaped since boyhood. It's what they said when asked who they were, not what they did. Every rep in the weight room, every hit taken under Friday night lights, every sacrifice made, it all reinforced that identity. The game becomes the mirror. Without it, the reflection disappears. When retirement comes too early, it's not just a career that ends. It's the dismantling of a self. Former safety Chris Borland retired after one season, 24 years old. Healthy by outward measure, but terrified by what he'd learned about brain trauma. His decision shook the league. Reporters framed it as bravery or fear, depending on their angle. But in his interviews, Borland spoke about identity. "Football was who I was," he said. "Not playing felt like erasing a part of me." That's the psychological fracture most people never see. When the pads come off for the last time, who's left standing underneath? Therapists who work with former athletes describe it as a form of grief, a death without a funeral. The body survives, the memories remain. But the version of you that was cheered, needed, celebrated, that version is gone. And unlike a typical career, there's no slow fade, no retirement party, no gold watch. One moment you're walking into a stadium. The next, you're limping into an MRI machine. One week, your name's trending on fantasy rosters. The next, the only calls you get are from creditors and doctors. Identity loss manifests differently for everyone. Some spiral into depression, others into obsession, trying to recreate the adrenaline rush of game day in dangerous ways. For some, it's reckless spending. For others, substance abuse. Many turn to coaching, broadcasting, or charity work, not for fame, but for proximity. They're trying to stay near the game that defined them. Psychologists studying retired players have found alarming trends. Rates of clinical depression and anxiety disorders are significantly higher among former NFL athletes than the general population. One study by the University of North Texas revealed that over 50% of early retirees reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress within the first year of leaving the game. Not because of war, but because of identity collapse, the loss of belonging, purpose, and structure. The structure of football is everything. Meetings at dawn, practices, film study, game day, a military rhythm that replaces normal life. When that rhythm stops, time becomes the enemy. Days stretch, silence grows. The mind, once trained for constant forward motion, starts turning inward. Michael Robinson, a former fullback, once described it as falling off a cliff. He said, "You wake up and no one's waiting for you at the facility. No one cares what you weigh. No one cares if you can run 40 yards or not. You don't even know what to eat anymore. Everything's gone." That's the cruelty of early retirement. It doesn't wait for readiness. It rips the identity away before the person underneath knows how to exist without it. Family members often notice it first. A husband who can't sleep. A father who avoids mirrors. A son who keeps replaying old highlights alone in the dark. The transition programs the league offers, short workshops, counseling hotlines, help some. But for many, they're just surface solutions to a deeper wound. You can't fix the loss of self with a pamphlet. In some cases, the identity crisis leads to devastating consequences. Former linebacker Keith McCants once said, "When I left the game, I didn't know who Keith was. I only knew number 99. After his career ended, McCants battled addiction and homelessness. He died in 2021, alone in his home, at the age of 53. Every player tells a version of the same story, that the game took their body first, then their mind, and finally, their sense of worth. For decades, they were told they were warriors. That pain was proof of toughness, that they were unbreakable. When the body breaks and the phone stops ringing, what's left? Some try to rebuild. They go back to school. They start businesses. They advocate for mental health awareness. But rebuilding identity after football is like learning to walk on a leg that never fully healed. Every step reminds you of what you used to be. There's a moment every retired player remembers, not their last game, but the first time someone doesn't recognize them. It might happen at a restaurant, at an airport, or during a pickup game when a kid looks at them blankly. For a man who's lived in headlines, that moment cuts deep. Fame is fleeting, but identity, when built on applause, disappears even faster. The league rarely talks about this part. Celebrates the legends, the comebacks, the Hall of Famers who transition smoothly into media careers. But those are the exceptions. The majority fade quietly, uninvited to alumni events, unfeatured in retrospectives. They become ghosts in their own story. In the locker room, identity is forged in steel. Every scar, every bruise, every roar reinforces the illusion of permanence. You think you'll always be a football player? You think it'll always matter. But outside that world, those words lose their weight. "I was a football player" becomes a whisper of something that once made sense. For some, that realization comes in therapy. For others, it comes in the middle of the night when their bodies ache and they reach for a phone that no longer rings. The truth settles in quietly. The game moved on without them. In those moments, some find peace, realizing that the love they had for the game doesn't have to die with their career. Others aren't so lucky. They chase that identity until it consumes them. They take unnecessary risks, push for comebacks, or self-destruct under the pressure of being someone again. Football sells immortality but delivers amnesia. It teaches men to define themselves by impact, not introspection. And when the cheering stops, they discover how little they know about who they are without the helmet. There's a line one former player said that captures it perfectly. "I thought I was chasing greatness. Turns out, I was running from myself." That's the essence of the NFL's hidden wound, not just broken bones, but broken identities. The game gives purpose, but it also takes it away. The crowd chants your name until the day it forgets how to pronounce it. And then you're left to relearn your own. Because the hardest rehab isn't for the knee, or the shoulder, or the back. It's for the self. There's an unspoken rhythm to football, a brotherhood forged in sweat, blood, and shared exhaustion. You wake up with the same men every day, grind through the same drills, bleed for the same goal. They're not just teammates. They're the only ones who truly understand the toll it takes. The bone-deep fatigue, the injections, the fear before every snap. That bond becomes the heartbeat of a player's life. And then one day, it's gone. When retirement, especially the early kind, arrives, the first thing most players notice isn't the quiet of the locker room or the loss of routine. It's the silence from the phone. The group texts fade. The calls stop. The people who once felt like families scattered to new rosters, new seasons, new lives. And the brotherhood, that sacred, unbreakable bond, evaporates faster than anyone expects. One former lineman once said, "You don't retire from the NFL. The NFL retires from you." He wasn't bitter. He was describing the truth. The league doesn't slow down. It doesn't wait for you to heal or adjust. It just replaces you. And the brothers who once lined up beside you, they're still in the fight, too focused on surviving to look back. It's not that they stopped caring. It's that the structure holding the Brotherhood together, the daily grind, the shared suffering, collapses once the game ends. Without it, the connection fades. Players describe post-retirement loneliness as something physical, a heaviness in the chest that no workout can cure. The adrenaline that once came from the roar of the crowd now dissolves into stillness. There are no meetings, no trainers, no game plans. Just a man and his thoughts. Some cope by trying to recreate that camaraderie. They join local leagues, start podcasts, or gather with former teammates for charity games. But it's never quite the same. There's always an invisible line separating those still in the game from those who've left it. It's a fraternity with a membership that expires the moment you stop wearing the uniform. Former linebacker Takeo Spikes once said, "You don't miss the game, you miss the guys." That's the truth that lingers behind the highlight reels. The ache of separation, the absence of shared purpose. For a decade or more, you lived in a bubble of mutual understanding. Then, suddenly, you're on the outside, looking in. For some, that loss becomes unbearable. Studies show that retired NFL players are twice as likely to experience severe social isolation compared to non-athletes their age. The reasons aren't just emotional, they're structural. The game consumes so much time and focus that by the time players leave, their social circles have shrunk to almost nothing outside football. Imagine dedicating every waking moment to a brotherhood, only to wake up one day and realize it doesn't exist anymore. There's a cruel irony to it all. The sport markets itself on teamwork, unity, and brotherhood. But once a player retires, that network vanishes, and the support system they thought would always be there reveals itself as temporary. The league celebrates family until the season ends. This isolation can be especially brutal for those forced out by injury. They didn't get the chance to say goodbye, to share that final locker room speech, to close the chapter with dignity. One day, they're there. The next, they're not. Their teammates hear the news through an injury report or a roster update. That's how fast brotherhood becomes memory. Take the story of Jake Locker, the former Titans quarterback. Highly drafted, full of promise, and adored by teammates. But repeated injuries cut his career short at 26. When he walked away, the transition was jarring. In an interview years later, he said what hurt most wasn't the pain or the pressure. It was the emptiness afterward. You go from having 30 guys who've got your back to nobody, he said. You start wondering if they even remember you. That sense of invisibility gnaws at many former players. They attend games as spectators, sitting among fans who cheer for their replacements. They shake hands at alumni events where people misremember their stats or don't remember them at all. And the locker room, once a sanctuary, becomes off-limits, guarded by a world that moved on. Loneliness has measurable effects. A 2018 study from the Journal of Sport Behavior found that social disconnection was one of the strongest predictors of depression among retired NFL players. Those who lacked consistent contact with former teammates reported significantly higher rates of alcohol abuse and anxiety. The brotherhood that once protected them on the field becomes the void that consumes them off it. It's a paradox. The same intensity that forged lifelong bonds makes their loss unbearable. Because in football, brotherhood isn't casual. It's built through shared trauma, injuries, exhaustion, near-death collisions. It's forged in pain. And when that pain ends, so does the connection that defined it. A former tight end once described it like this: when you're in, you're part of something sacred. When you're out, you feel like a ghost. He wasn't exaggerating. Some retired players attend funerals of old teammates just to reconnect, because grief is sometimes the only gathering place left. And yet, Amid the loneliness, some players find new forms of brotherhood. They reconnect through advocacy groups, foundations for mental health, concussion awareness, or charity organizations that reunite alumni. These communities become lifelines, proof that the bond can evolve, even if the game can't. Still, not everyone makes it that far. For some, the loss of camaraderie leads to self-destruction. Former players like Terry Long and Andre Waters battled severe depression before taking their own lives, both suffering from CTE. Friends and family later said the isolation played as large a role as the disease itself. The feeling of being forgotten can break even the strongest men. The NFL has tried to re-engage former players through programs, counseling, and events. But the issue runs deeper than outreach. It's about belonging, a human need that can be replaced with networking mixers or newsletters. Football is a collective pursuit of meaning. It's about we, not I, when that collective disappears. Players are left facing a question they were never trained to answer. Who am I without them? Even the most self-assured athletes feel the void. They try to fill it with business ventures, broadcasting gigs, or charity work. But underneath the surface, the ache remains. The camaraderie that once carried them through everything now exists only in memory's locker room. Laughter, bus rides, shared pain that no one else could understand. Some nights, they replay those moments in their heads. The smell of grass after rain, the sound of cleats on concrete, the echo of laughter before kickoff. Those memories become ghosts too. They haunt not with fear, but with longing. Because brotherhood, once forged, never fully dies. It just becomes unreachable, trapped in time, sealed behind a game that will never look back. And as the lights dim and the stadium empties, what remains isn't just loss. It's the echo of connection, the silence where the brotherhood once was. By the time the cheering stopped, the silence wasn't just emotional, it was legal. In that silence, thousands of former players began filing claims, petitions, and lawsuits. The same men once celebrated as warriors were now plaintiffs. Standing in courthouse lines, clutching folders full of medical reports and denial letters. They weren't fighting opponents anymore. They were fighting the system that once dressed them in armor. The concussion settlement became the headline, but it was only one chapter of a longer, darker story. In 2011, more than 4,500 retired players sued the NFL, alleging the league had concealed the long-term dangers of concussions. They argued that the league knew, for decades, that repeated head trauma led to cognitive decline, memory loss, and violent mood swings, yet continued to promote a culture of denial. Behind the glossy highlight reels, medical staff were pressured to clear players faster, and concussions were relabeled as dings. The lawsuit shook the league's foundation. In 2013, a tentative settlement was announced, $765 million spread across thousands of players. It sounded monumental until the math came in. After legal fees, administrative costs, and payout tiers, many players received far less than expected, sometimes only a few $1,000s. For men whose lives were reduced to medical codes, it wasn't justice. It was a receipt. Take the case of Kevin Turner, a former fullback for the Patriots and Eagles. Diagnosed with ALS, Turner became a symbol of the lawsuit's moral urgency. His testimony before Congress, his voice weak, his body frail, was a haunting reminder of what football could take from a man. "I gave my body to the game," he said, "and the game broke it." Turner passed away in 2016, but his foundation continued to fight for research and reform. His brain, donated for study, revealed severe CTE. Then there were players who didn't even make it that far. Backup linemen, special teams gunners, camp bodies, men whose names never made the rosters but whose bodies endured the same collisions. Many of them discovered that because they'd only played a handful of games, they didn't qualify for settlement money. The system, they realized, didn't just measure years of service, it measured worth. Behind the concussion headlines, another legal war simmered: disability and pension claims. For retired players suffering from chronic injuries, The NFL's benefits program was supposed to provide a lifeline. Instead, it became another maze. The Burt Bell, Pete Rozelle NFL Player Retirement Plan, created to support former athletes, was notorious for its rejections. Claims were denied on technicalities. Medical evaluations were questioned. Appeals dragged on for years. Linebacker Dwight Hollier once described the process as trying to prove you rebroken to the people who broke you. Many players walked away, too exhausted or too proud to continue. Others persisted, hoping to be approved before their symptoms consumed them. Some died waiting. In 2020, the controversy deepened when investigative reports revealed racial bias in the NFL's concussion settlement program. Neurological evaluations had used race norming, an outdated practice that assumed black players started with lower baseline cognitive function than white players. This meant that when tests measured cognitive decline, black players had to show greater deterioration to qualify for compensation. In essence, they were being penalized for their race in a league where more than 70% of players are black. The outrage forced the NFL to abandon the practice in 2021, but the damage was already done. Thousands of claims had been processed under biased criteria. For some players, lawsuits weren't just about money, they were about recognition. Recognition that their pain was real, that their suffering wasn't a personal failure, but a systemic one. Jim McMahon, the brash, band-wearing quarterback who led the Chicago Bears to a Super Bowl victory, became one of the lawsuit's loudest voices. By his early 50s, McMahon was battling early-onset dementia and chronic pain so severe he sometimes couldn't remember where he lived. "I feel like I'm dying a slow death," he told reporters. And the league doesn't care. Others took their fight to Congress. Former players testified in hearings about their struggles, their words often interrupted by tears or long pauses as they searched for the right words in fogged minds. Lawmakers listened, cameras rolled, and yet, little changed. The machine of football, billions in broadcasting rights, advertising, and stadium deals was too big to stop. The system that celebrated sacrifice had institutionalized suffering. But even as settlements were paid and press releases issued, a quieter generation of retirees faced their own battles. Insurance disputes, players who sustained injuries that weren't headline-grabbing concussions, torn ligaments. Spinal fusions, nerve damage, found themselves arguing over coverage with insurers. Many discovered that their post-career medical costs were barely covered or not at all. The very contracts that promised lifetime healthcare included language that capped or excluded certain procedures. Once the cheers faded, the coverage did too. The lawsuits revealed something deeper about the NFL's soul. That beneath its gleaming mythology of brotherhood and valor lies an institution built to protect itself first. Each legal case, each denied claim, each settlement check was a fragment of a larger truth that the league's image of invincibility depended on invisibility. The invisible pain, the invisible costs, the invisible men. For those who won their cases, the victory was hollow. Money could buy treatment, but not clarity. It could pay for surgeries, but not memory. Some of the same men who signed their settlement checks couldn't remember doing so months later. The damage was permanent. The legal triumphs were temporary. And yet, amidst all this, there remained an unbreakable brotherhood among those who had suffered. Players banded together, forming advocacy groups, charities, and networks of support. They raised awareness for mental health, concussion safety, and post-career care. They turned their pain into activism, but it was always uphill. The league's machine moved forward, its new season starting fresh each fall, while their bodies remained trapped in old wars. What began as isolated legal filings had grown into a reckoning, not just with the NFL, but with American culture itself. A culture that glorifies the warrior, but rarely asks what happens when the war is over. For every lawsuit that settled, another began. For every player who spoke out, another stayed silent, not out of choice, but out of fear, or shame, or dementia's steady erasure. And so the story repeats, year after year. the next generation entering bright-eyed, the last one fading quietly away. Justice, in this world, rarely looks like vindication. It looks like survival. There is a strange kind of courage in walking away from a dream, especially when that dream defines you. In a league built on sacrifice and endurance, quitting is seen as betrayal. Yet, for some, it was the only way to survive. These are the stories of men who didn't T-fade from the game because they couldn't T-play, but because they wouldn't die for it. Chris Borland was supposed to be the prototype of the modern linebacker, compact, explosive, instinctive. In 2014, his rookie season with the San Francisco 49ers was a revelation. He led the team in tackles, earned national praise, and was already being called the next great defensive cornerstone. But as quickly as his star rose, it vanished. The following offseason, Borland made a decision that sent shockwaves through the sport. He retired. He was 24, healthy, productive, marketable, and done. Borland's announcement hit the NFL like a tremor under its golden stage. He wasn't leaving because of an injury, a scandal, or a failed opportunity. He was leaving because he de-read the research, the growing body of evidence linking football to chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. He said he couldn't reconcile the risks with his conscience. "I just thought to myself," he told ESPN, "what am I risking my life for?" That question haunted the league. In an era when the NFL was investing millions in concussion protocols and safety campaigns, Borland's choice made headlines worldwide. Not because it was sensational, but because it was rational. Here was a man at the height of his ability, choosing life over legacy. Some fans called him soft. Others called him brave. But for the men quietly suffering in retirement, he was something else entirely, proof that it was okay to walk away. Then came Andrew Luck. His story wasn't about fear, it was about exhaustion. Drafted first overall in 2012, Luck was the kind of quarterback franchises are built around. Brilliant, disciplined, seemingly unbreakable. He endured torn cartilage, lacerated kidneys, concussions, and broken bones. Yet always returned, always smiled for the cameras, always carried the weight of expectation. But pain wears down even the strongest minds. In 2019, at age 29, Andrew Luck retired. His announcement, made tearfully on the sidelines during a preseason game, sent shock and disbelief through the crowd. Boos rained down from fans who felt betrayed. But Luck's words afterward were simple and devastating. "For the last 4 years, I've been in this cycle of injury, pain, rehab, injury, pain, rehab. And it's taken my joy away." That's the line that lingers. It's taken my joy away. For many, Luck's decision symbolized the quiet rebellion of a generation unwilling to sacrifice happiness for heroism. His body could have continued, but his spirit couldn't. In walking away, he humanized the game's gods and exposed the fragility hidden beneath the armor. But not every forgotten hero had a name like Borland or Luck. Most were men whose retirements didn't make headlines: undrafted players, special teams gunners, camp bodies who played just long enough to dream, but not long enough to recover. Consider Casey Rogers too, a linebacker who spent years bouncing between practice squads before a devastating injury ended his career. He'd spent his entire youth chasing the NFL, finally reaching the edge of permanence, only to lose it on a single play. In interviews afterward, he spoke not of bitterness, but of emptiness. "You work your whole life for this one thing," he said. "And when it's gone, you realize you never planned for anything else." These are the men whose names never made jerseys, whose statistics barely exist in databases, yet whose bodies tell the same stories of pain, surgery, and silence. There was Jake Locker, a first-round quarterback whose grit defined him at the University of Washington and briefly in the NFL with the Titans. But after repeated injuries and mounting frustration, he too stepped away early at 26. Locker later revealed that the mental and emotional toll of constant physical strain was too much. I couldn't keep pretending I was okay, he said. Then there's A.J. Tarpley, another 4'9" linebacker who, like Borland, retired young after multiple concussions. In his open letter to fans, he wrote, "This game has given me everything I could have ever wanted, and I will always love it. But the risk is greater than the reward." These players didn't lose their battles, they redefined victory. They showed that courage isn't just in the hit, but in the decision to stop taking them. And yet, history rarely honors restraint. The league's mythology has no room for quiet departures. It celebrates Iron Man, the Brett Favres, the Jerry Rices, the Tom Bradys. But it forgets the ones who left for survival, not spotlight. Behind closed doors, however, their choices rippled through locker rooms. Younger players started asking questions about brain scans, insurance policies, long-term care. Agents began negotiating differently, adding language to protect clients' futures. Parents of young athletes hesitated before signing permission slips. The culture was shifting, slowly, painfully. But the cost of walking away remains high. Financially, most early retirees lose out on pension eligibility and long-term benefits tied to service time. Psychologically, they face alienation. Teammates stop calling. Reporters stop asking. Fans move on. The league is built on replacement. When one man leaves, another takes his spot before the cleats are even cold. Chris Borland later said that the hardest part wasn't the decision, it was living with it. You lose your tribe, he admitted. You go from being part of something massive to being just another guy. That's the cruel paradox of early retirement. It's an act of self-preservation that still feels like death. The player survives, but the identity doesn't. And yet, in the broader history of the NFL, these stories are necessary. They serve as mirrors, uncomfortable, reflective, true. They remind the world that beneath the helmets are fragile men making impossible choices. That the game's glory is inseparable from its grief. Some, like Luck, found peace in anonymity. Others, like Borland, used their voices to advocate for reform, speaking at conferences. Funding research, helping younger players navigate their risks. Their courage wasn't televised on Sundays, but it might save lives on Mondays. To call them forgotten is partly true. The league has little incentive to remember them. But to those who've lived the same pain, they're not forgotten at all. They are the quiet heroes of survival. Their stories whisper through every training camp and every rookie symposium. Reminders that football's greatest cost isn't measured in yards or rings, but in years stolen from the men who gave everything to play. The truth about football's cost didn't come from the players first. It came from the people who studied what happened to them after the games ended. Doctors, scientists, and researchers who refused to look away. For decades, the NFL treated injury as a temporary inconvenience, something to be managed, taped, injected, and ignored. But behind the X-rays and sideline protocols, a few medical professionals began to notice a pattern that couldn't be explained by bad luck. They saw something systemic, the slow unraveling of minds and bodies sacrificed for the spectacle of the sport. The story begins with Dr. Bennett Omalu. In 2002, working as a forensic pathologist in Pittsburgh, Omalu performed an autopsy on former Pittsburgh Steelers center Mike Webster. Webster was a legend, a Hall of Famer, 4-time Super Bowl champion, and the physical embodiment of the NFL's glory years. But by the time he died at 50, he was a broken man living out of his truck, paranoid, violent, and lost inside his own brain. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but Omalu saw something else. When he examined Webster's brain under a microscope, he found extensive tau protein buildup, the same degenerative patterns seen in boxers with punch-drunk syndrome. He called it chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. And with that discovery, he unknowingly declared war on the most powerful sports league in America. Omalu published his findings in Neurosurgery in 2005, thinking the NFL would embrace the truth and take action. Instead, the league's reaction was swift and brutal. Their mild traumatic brain injury committee, led by team doctors with deep league ties, dismissed Omalu's research. They claimed it was flawed, unscientific, even sensational. They demanded the journal retract it. Omalu, a Nigerian immigrant who believed science spoke louder than status, suddenly found himself painted as an enemy of the game. But the evidence didn't disappear. After Webster Omalu examined the brains of other former players, Terry Long, Andre Waters, Justin Strelchik, all young men who had suffered severe depression, cognitive decline, and in some cases, suicide. Every one of them showed the same pathology. The connection was undeniable, and with every autopsy, the silence around football's hidden dangers grew harder to maintain. By the late 2000s, more doctors began to step forward. Dr. Anne McKee at Boston University's CTE Center conducted one of the most comprehensive brain studies in sports history. Her findings were staggering. Out of 111 deceased NFL players studied, 110 had CTE. The disease wasn't rare, it was endemic. McKee's research turned what the NFL called a theory into a fact supported by hard science. But even then, the league's response was defensive, not corrective. In 2009, under mounting public pressure, the NFL finally acknowledged a link between concussions and long-term brain damage, a statement that arrived years too late for countless players already suffering. But even that admission came wrapped in legal and corporate caution. The doctors who had sounded the alarm watched as the league tried to reframe the narrative from negligence to concern. From denial to damage control. Dr. McKee later said in interviews that the hardest part wasn't the research, it was the resistance. "I thought the facts would speak for themselves," she said. But the NFL wasn't listening for facts. They were listening for threats. Then there were the team doctors caught between medicine and money. Many of them loved their players, treated their wounds, and saw the pain up close. But they also worked for franchises with billion-dollar stakes. To speak out was to risk not just a job, but a career. One such figure was Dr. Elliot Pellman, who chaired the NFL's original concussion committee. Pellman was not a neurologist. He was a rheumatologist with strong ties to the New York Jets. Under his leadership, the committee produced studies that downplayed concussion risks and claimed players could safely return to the field the same day. Those papers, later discredited, allowed the league to maintain a facade of safety while its athletes quietly deteriorated. Other physicians watched in horror. Some resigned. Others went public. Dr. Julian Bales, a former team neurosurgeon, broke ranks after seeing too many players develop early dementia. "You can't treat this like a sprained ankle," he said. "Every hit changes something you can't fix." Their testimonies were acts of quiet rebellion. They weren't trying to destroy the sport. They were trying to save the people who played it. Yet, for years, the league painted them as alarmists. It wasn't until investigative journalists like Alan Schwartz of the New York Times began exposing the NFL as suppression of science that public opinion began to shift. Schwartz's reporting connected the dots between concussions, suicides, and corporate denial. The image of America's most beloved sport was cracking under the weight of truth. Even as lawsuits mounted, many inside the medical community faced intimidation. Research grants were pulled. Access to players' medical histories was restricted. Doctors who spoke to the press found themselves quietly blacklisted from team contracts. The message was clear. Loyalty to the Shield came before loyalty to science. And yet, these doctors persisted. Dr. Robert Cantu, co-founder of the CTE Center, advocated for youth football reforms, pushing to delay tackle play until age 14. His message was controversial but grounded in data. Repeated subconcussive impacts in childhood could lead to the same brain pathology seen in professionals decades later. The NFL publicly distanced itself from those calls, fearing it would hurt participation rates. Privately, many league physicians admitted he was right. In 2016, the dam finally broke. During a congressional hearing, Jeff Miller, the NFL's senior vice president for health and safety, was asked whether there was a link between Wells' link between Wells' links. Wells lect between Wells lect between Wells lect texture that glides on smoothly and leaves a rich, long-lasting color. During a congressional hearing, when Wells lest, Wells lest, Telebia, the NFL's Wells les, Senior, Wells well, was els qued. When we was lev, you see with Wells well lenovely, de quoits of the isect, by dileps pekis. Football and CTE. For the first time, an NFL official said yes. It was a sentence years in the making, delivered too late for the men whose families had already buried them. But acknowledgement isn't the same as accountability. Dr. Omalo McKee and others continued their work, now joined by a generation of researchers inspired by their defiance. Their efforts gave families answers, shaped safety reforms, and transformed public understanding of brain trauma. But it also revealed a painful paradox that truth in the NFL often comes at the cost of belonging. Omalu never worked for the league again. McKee still faces resistance from insiders who accuse her of exaggeration. And while the NFL has poured millions into brain research, critics argue that its funding serves as both penance and protection, an investment in optics more than outcomes. Still, without these doctors, the phrase concussion protocol might never have existed. Their research forced a reckoning that saved lives, even if it came too late to save the pioneers who inspired it. There's something profoundly human in their defiance. They weren't chasing fame, they were defending truth. They watched athletes deteriorate in real time and chose to break silence rather than follow orders. And in doing so, they exposed what the game itself could not admit, that playing through pain was killing its heroes. Their courage wasn't celebrated with parades or endorsements. It was marked by isolation, skepticism, and, sometimes, threats. Yet, their legacy endures in every helmet redesign. Every sideline evaluation, every player who pauses after a hit instead of rushing back into battle. The doctors who spoke up became the conscience of football, the reminder that behind the spectacle lies science. And behind the science, lives. Every Sunday, America tunes in for a story. The story of pain turned to power, injury turned to redemption. The comeback is one of the NFL's most beloved myths, carefully packaged and endlessly replayed. Broadcasters sell it, sponsors fund it, fans devour it. And every time an injured player limps back onto the field, the cameras pan in. The commentators swell with praise, and the myth deepens. The network cuts to commercial. A beer ad, a car ad, a sportswear brand flashing words like grit, resilience, never quit. It's all part of the same illusion that pain is temporary, that recovery is inevitable, that greatness is born in the refusal to stop. But behind that narrative lies a truth the cameras rarely linger on. Not every story has a comeback. Some players don't rise, they vanish. The miracle returns we glorify often hide the wreckage that follows surgeries. Depression, financial ruin, families collapsing under the weight of unhealed trauma. Yet, the broadcasts never show that. Because in the business of sports media, pain sells only when it ends triumphantly. The media's relationship with football's brutality is paradoxical. It thrives on it, but pretends to mourn it. Every hit that shakes a stadium is followed by a slow-motion replay, multiple angles, dramatic commentary, suspenseful silence, and then, if the player gets up, applause. But when he doesn't, when he stays down too long, the tone shifts. The camera cuts to the sidelines. The commentators fill air with cliches. Let's hope he's okay. He's a warrior. You hate to see this happen. Then, moments later, the feed cuts to an advertisement, often for the very league that just broke him. That cycle of glorification and erasure is the media mirage. It's how a culture built on violence disguises itself as a celebration of courage. Consider the way networks have handled concussions over the decades. Before the word CTE entered public vocabulary, head injuries were framed as minor setbacks, A player got his bell rung. A coach would say, "He's toughing it out." Announcers laughed about hard-nosed football. The broadcast narrative didn't just describe the game, it defined its morality. To be hurt was fine. To stay hurt was weak. When the concussion crisis finally made headlines in the 2010s, coverage shifted, but only superficially. The same networks that once trivialized injuries now aired somber montages about player safety. They ran interviews with doctors, showed updated helmets, discussed new protocols. But the structure of storytelling didn't change. The focus remained on the drama of recovery, not the permanence of loss. The system rewards amnesia. Highlight packages are edited to erase the aftermath. No crutches, no limps, no therapy sessions. The narrative must move forward, because football sells hope, not consequence. Take Alex Smith, whose catastrophic leg injury in 2018 nearly cost him his life. 17 surgeries, a life-threatening infection, and years of rehabilitation later, he returned to the field. ESPN ran a 30-minute feature titled Project 11, documenting his miraculous comeback. It was cinematic, emotional, and undeniably inspiring. But what it didn't linger on was the moral question underneath: should he have come back? Was the comeback a triumph of will, or a testament to the sport's toxic expectation that redemption requires suffering? Smith himself later admitted the fear he carried. It wasn't about football anymore. It was about proving I wasn't broken. That statement captures everything wrong with the system. The idea that brokenness is shameful, that survival only matters if it ends in spectacle. For every Alex Smith, there are hundreds whose stories end quietly, the players who never recovered, who couldn't walk without pain, who lost their memory or their purpose. Their stories don't make air. There's no halftime segment for the man who can't hold his child without shaking. No primetime coverage for the lineman who takes his own life at 45. The networks know this. They have access to the same data, the lawsuits, the brain studies, the former stars suffering in silence. But addressing it would mean turning the camera on the hand that feeds them. The NFL's broadcast partners, Fox, CBS, NBC, ESPN, pay billions for the rights to air games. Their profits depend on maintaining the illusion that the game is dangerous, yes, but noble. Brutal, but beautiful. Lethal, but worth it. Even the language of commentary protects the myth. When a player tears a ligament, the word setback is used instead of trauma. When he retires early, it's called stepping away, never quitting. When concussions happen, the term protocol replaces brain injury. These euphemisms sanitize suffering, transforming pain into performance. Sponsors reinforce the same narrative. Nike, Gatorade, Under Armour, their ads glorify recovery as heroism. Just do it. No excuses. Prove them wrong. The implication is always the same. Pain is a test of worth, and stopping means failure. It's a message that seeps into every level of the game, from youth football to the pros. The Mirage extends beyond television. On social media, highlight clips are stripped of context and looped endlessly. Hits, comebacks, tears of joy. Viral posts celebrate perseverance but ignore permanence. When a player collapses, millions watch. When he disappears into rehabilitation or retirement, silence follows. That silence is intentional. The NFL and its media ecosystem have perfected the art of selective memory. They know that fans don't tune in for grief. They tune in for greatness. So the networks curate the illusion of invincibility, carefully omitting the aftermath that would shatter it. But there are cracks in the facade. In recent years, a few documentaries and investigative pieces have begun to push back. The deaths of players like Junior Seau and Dave Durson, both of whom suffered from CTE before taking their own lives, forced the conversation into daylight. Journalists like Steve Fainaru and Mark Fainaru-Wada of ESPN's Outside the Lines challenged the league's denials, revealing how deep the cover-ups ran. Still, even their work existed on the margins of mainstream coverage. game day broadcasts, the NFL's most visible platform, remain mostly untouched. There's a reason for that. The NFL's broadcast deals aren't just partnerships, they're symbiosis. Networks rely on football to drive ratings. The league relies on networks to shape its image. It's a feedback loop powered by billions of dollars. To break that loop would require confronting the moral contradiction at the heart of the spectacle. That America's favorite sport thrives on human damage it refuses to show. Occasionally, a moment pierces the illusion. A player carted off in silence, a teammate kneeling in prayer, a crowd holding its breath. But even then, the story is framed as a testament to the sport's nobility. The cameras capture emotion, not consequence. The player's suffering becomes a narrative device, not a human tragedy. When Damar Hamlin collapsed in 2023, live on Monday Night Football, the country froze. For a moment, the illusion shattered. Viewers confronted what football really is. Not entertainment, but risk incarnate. The broadcast fell silent, unsure how to process what had always been edited out. But within weeks, as Hamlin recovered, the story shifted. The headlines changed from tragedy to miracle. The league resumed its rhythm. The cycle reset. That's the media mirage. Tragedy turned to triumph. Pain turned to product. And for every player who becomes a symbol of resilience, there are hundreds who vanish between the reels, their lives too inconvenient for prime time. The networks move on, the sponsors roll their ads, and the silence continues. Because in the NFL's grand story, suffering only matters if it ends with applause. In every NFL story, there's another narrative playing out beyond the roar of the crowd, quieter, untelevised, but no less brutal. It unfolds in kitchens, bedrooms, and late-night phone calls. It's the story of families, the wives, children, and parents who bear the weight when a player's dream collapses. When a man's career ends early, the consequences rarely stop at his body. They echo through his home. The paycheck disappears, but the pain lingers. The fame fades, but the fear remains. Fear of bills, of brain fog, of the day he won't remember his child's name. Lauren Johnson remembers that fear vividly. Her husband, a special teams player for 5 seasons, tore his Achilles on a routine punt return. The trainers rushed in, cameras turned away, and the broadcast cut to commercial. "You don't think about what comes after," she said. "You just think, he'll rehab, he'll play again." But he didn't. The rehab led to complications. The painkillers dulled his body, but not his anxiety. Within 6 months, he was limping around the house, angry, unemployed, and lost. Their 2-year-old son would ask, "When is Daddy going to work again?" The question had no answer. NFL contracts aren't guaranteed. Once a player can't perform, the checks stop. The lifestyle, the house, the cars, the image was built on the illusion of permanence. When it vanished, families often found themselves stranded in the wreckage. The NFL Players Association estimates that nearly 16% of players face financial distress within 2 years of leaving the league. But that statistic doesn't capture the emotional bankruptcy that accompanies it, the toll of watching a loved one unravel from hero to ghost. For many wives, the transition is as jarring as it is cruel. They married men whose identities were inseparable from the game. Football dictated their schedule, their income, their social world. Suddenly, the structure vanishes, and what remains is uncertainty. The question of who they are outside the spotlight. Some marriages fracture under the strain. Others harden into quiet endurance. Sarah Morgan's husband played offensive line for 7 seasons before suffering repeated concussions. After the 3rd one, she recalled, he started changing. His temper, his memory, even the way he looked at us. It was like he was there, but not really. The diagnosis came later. Early-stage CTE indicators. She became caretaker and counselor. The man she met in college, confident, playful, steady, began to fade. "People talk about football being a team sport," she said. "But no one prepares you for when your family becomes the new team." And you're the only one still in the game. Children feel it too. Some are too young to understand why their father no longer travels or why he winces when they jump on his back. Others grow up fast, absorbing the silence that follows every bad day. The dream that once inspired pride becomes the source of anxiety. One former linebacker's teenage daughter described it bluntly. "I used to brag that my dad was in the NFL. Now I just hope he remembers my birthday." And behind every emotional collapse lies a logistical one. Insurance disputes, medical bills, lost benefits, disability claims that take years to process. Families become administrators in a system designed to delay. The league's disability board, criticized repeatedly for its stringent approval rates, often forces families to relive their trauma, documenting injuries, hiring lawyers, and proving again and again that the damage is real. But beyond the money is something deeper: the loss of identity as a shared experience. When a player retires early, his family retires too. The wives lose their communities, the other spouses they bonded with in the luxury boxes, the rhythm of the season that dictated life. The parents, once proud at tailgates, now avoid conversations that remind them of what could have been. There's also the moral confusion. Do you resent the game that built your life, or thank it for the years it gave you? Most live somewhere in between. They love the man football created, but hate what it took from him. It's a paradox repeated across generations. Vince Young's mother once said she still cries when she watches football because she knows what it did to her son's confidence. Calvin Johnson's wife spoke about the daily pain he endured just to walk. Chris Borland's parents admitted relief when he retired early. Relief that he chose his mind over money. But for every Borland who exits by choice, there are dozens who are forced out without preparation. Those stories end in fragments: foreclosed homes, broken marriages, or quiet disappearances. One agent, speaking anonymously, said, "You don't see the after. You don't see the wife taking care of a 35-year-old man who moves like he's 70. What makes these stories tragic isn't only the suffering around. It's the silence around them." The NFL rarely discusses the domestic fallout of early retirements. The focus remains on comeback narratives or inspirational comebacks. Families who speak out often face backlash. "You're ruining the image," one wife was told after posting about her husband's chronic pain on social media. Fans don't want to hear about that, but fans should. Because the game they love is built on borrowed time, time that someone else often pays for later. Every touchdown comes with a hidden invoice, and families are the ones left to settle it. There's also the invisible emotional work that goes unnoticed. Spouses managing prescriptions, parents handling hospital paperwork, kids adjusting to new schools after downsizing. The glory fades fast, the logistics do not. Still, amid the heartbreak, some families adapt. They rebuild around new definitions of success. They advocate for awareness, launch foundations, or speak publicly about the mental health crisis among former players. Their resilience offers a counterpoint to despair. Not redemption, but realism. Take the story of John Doran Bowes. After surviving 14 NFL seasons, he discovered a life-threatening heart condition that ended his career instantly. But with his wife's support, he found a second act as a magician and motivational speaker. His story isn't about denial, it's about transformation. He once said, "The magic trick isn't making pain disappear. It's finding a way to live with it." The same could be said for every family behind the headlines, the ones who wake up every morning beside someone who once seemed invincible and now just hopes for a pain-free day. The cost of early retirement isn't measured in dollars or games missed. It's measured in birthdays forgotten, nights spent managing pain, and the quiet erosion of normalcy. It's the wife who hides the bills so her husband doesn't feel useless. It's the child who learns not to ask why dad forgets things. It's the parents who watch from the stands one last time, not realizing it's the last time. When the game moves on, it leaves behind a trail of unspoken grief. Families become archives of what the league would rather forget: the human cost of entertainment. The lights of the stadium shine bright enough to hide the shadows. But in those shadows, the truth lingers. The ones who cheered the loudest often carry the heaviest silence. Redemption in football doesn't come with a whistle. It comes in the long, quiet after. When the body heals or doesn't. When the crowd is gone and a man has to decide who he's going to be now that he's no longer what he was. For many former NFL players, early retirement was supposed to be a transition. Instead, it became a reckoning. The men who had built their entire identities around the game suddenly faced a blank page. Some tried to write their next chapter through coaching. Others turned to business, broadcasting, or advocacy. A few even found peace. But for most, the redemption they sought was not from the public, it was from themselves. Jason Brown was one of them, a talented center drafted by the Ravens. He walked away from millions to become a farmer. "People thought I was crazy," he said, years later. "But after football, I realized I didn't know who I was without it." His story made headlines because it seemed pure. A man trading fame for soil, lights for silence. But beneath that, there was something deeper. A quiet protest against the machine that had used him up and offered little in return. Others weren't as lucky. Some entered coaching, thinking it would fill the void. But coaching demands the same obsession that broke them. The same hours, the same pressure, just without the glory. "It's like being addicted to the drug that almost killed you," said a former defensive back turned assistant coach. You tell yourself you're helping others avoid your mistakes. But really, you're chasing that feeling again, the one you swore you'd left behind. The NFL Alumni Network promotes transition programs, career workshops, and counseling sessions for retirees. But many players describe them as surface-level, short-term fixes for long-term wounds. "They hand you a binder and a handshake," one ex-linebacker said. "But they can't give you purpose." For those who try business ventures, the results are often brutal. Statistics show that within 3 years of retirement, nearly 78% of former players face financial hardship. They're targets for bad investments, manipulative advisors, or simply unrealistic expectations. From restaurants to clothing brands to cryptocurrency startups, the pattern repeats. Men chasing identity through enterprise, mistaking financial recovery for personal redemption. But then there are stories that stand apart, not because they end in triumph, but because they show what redemption really looks like. Take Michael Robinson. After retiring early, he became an NFL Network analyst and later a youth mentor. His advocacy work focuses on helping young players understand financial literacy and mental health before they need it. "We were trained to hit, not to heal," he said. That's what has to change. Then there's Rashard Mendenhall, the former Steelers running back who walked away from football at just 26. Fans mocked him for quitting. But Mendenhall saw something others didn't: the unsustainability of a life defined by physical sacrifice. He became a writer and later a producer for HBO's Ballers, ironically telling stories about the same culture he had escaped. His work revealed that walking away wasn't weakness, it was clarity. Even the superstars wrestle with the illusion of redemption. Andrew Luck, once the face of a franchise, stunned the world when he retired at 29. He cited exhaustion, both physical and emotional. In his first months away from the game, he described the experience as shedding armor. But redemption didn't come easily. "When you've been conditioned to chase perfection, peace feels like losing," he said later. His honesty, rare in the world of football stoicism, reframed early retirement, not as defeat, but as defiance. These stories illustrate a paradox. The same league that glorifies toughness offers little structure for those seeking recovery. There's no roadmap for reinvention, no real education for what comes next. Many players compare it to being dropped off a cliff. One day, you're part of the most exclusive club in America. The next, you're anonymous. Some attempt advocacy, fighting for concussion reform, disability rights, or youth protection. Chris Borland, perhaps the most prominent example, retired after one season due to fear of brain injury. Since then, he's become a voice for athlete safety, mental health awareness, and ethical reform in contact sports. His activism hasn't made him rich or universally admired, but it gave him meaning, something the league never promised, but that every player eventually craves. Others fight quieter battles, former players who become physical therapists, teachers, or community leaders. They trade the helmet for humility. These men rarely make headlines, yet they carry the true DNA of redemption, rebuilding lives not to prove a point, but to heal one. Still, for many, the system itself resists change. League structures prioritize image protection over rehabilitation. Players who speak out risk being labeled bitter or disgruntled. Advocacy, in the NFL's culture, is often misread as betrayal. That stigma keeps too many from seeking help. One retired cornerback summed it up perfectly. You retold your whole life to never show weakness. Then, when you need help, you don't know how to ask for it. Even when support exists, it's uneven. The NFL Legends community, for instance, offers mental health resources and career training. But the participation rate remains low. Pride, distrust, and the lack of long-term funding undermine its impact. It's not that players don't want help, said one psychologist who works with retirees. It's that they don't believe it's real help. They've seen too much PR, too many broken promises. The irony is stark. The same league that produces billion-dollar TV deals struggles to support the men who made it possible. Those who try to rebuild must do so largely on their own, outside the structure that once defined their every move. And yet, in that struggle, some find freedom. Redemption, they learn, isn't about returning to what was lost. It's about redefining success entirely. For some, that means family. For others, faith. For a few, it's advocacy, turning pain into purpose. Tony Boselli once said that leaving football was like losing a limb. But when he began mentoring young offensive linemen, he found something unexpected. Not closure, but continuity. You realize you can still give to the game, he said, just not the way you used to. The lesson repeated across countless redemption stories, you don't heal by forgetting who you were. You heal by forgiving yourself for who you can no longer be. Some players never find that peace. They spend years chasing the ghost of the game through failed businesses, strained marriages, or quiet bitterness. Others, though, come to see that their second act doesn't need a stadium. The truth is simple, but hard. Redemption in the NFL isn't scripted. It's fought for one therapy session, one family dinner, one honest conversation at a time. And maybe that's the only real redemption there is. The moment a man looks in the mirror and stops trying to be the legend he once was and starts becoming the human he still is. Reckoning came slowly to the National Football League, not with explosions, but with whispers that grew too loud to ignore. For decades, the Shield stood untouchable, projecting an image of power, unity, and American pride. But behind that gleam was a quiet rot, lawsuits, medical cover-ups, and lives unraveling in silence. The NFL, once untouchable, began facing a storm of accountability it could no longer outrun. The first cracks appeared in the late 1990s, when players started connecting their declining mental health to years of head trauma. At first, the league dismissed it, labeling symptoms as isolated incidents or personal misfortunes. The term chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, was treated as fringe science. Yet, as more evidence surfaced, the narrative began to shift. Researchers like Dr. Bennett Omalu and later Dr. Ann McKee unearthed the hard truth. Repeated head impacts, even without diagnosed concussions, caused irreversible brain degeneration. At first, the NFL denied it outright. It formed its own mild traumatic brain injury committee, which published papers minimizing risk and downplaying player concerns. Internal documents revealed a familiar pattern. Protect the brand first, the players second. The league is committed to safety. executives would say publicly. But behind closed doors, the objective was clear: maintain the illusion of control. The reckoning accelerated after the 2013 Frontline documentary League of Denial, which exposed decades of obfuscation. By then, thousands of former players had filed lawsuits alleging the NFL had concealed the long-term dangers of concussions. The numbers were staggering, more than 4,500 plaintiffs in total. The settlement that followed was historic: an initial $765 million agreement that later expanded to over $1 billion. It was hailed as a victory, but beneath the surface, players knew it wasn't. Many claims were denied. Many payouts delayed. The fine print, much like the contracts they once signed, left to many men behind. Retired safety Scott Brantley, one of the early plaintiffs, summed it up bitterly: "They pay $1 billion before they say they were wrong." The league's true reckoning, it seemed, was not financial. It was moral. Could an institution built on controlled violence ever truly prioritize health over profit? The pressure didn't just come from the courts. The media, once complicit in glorifying heroics over health, began to turn. Investigative journalists uncovered emails showing league officials attempting to influence scientific studies and pressure the National Institute of Health. When that failed, the league shifted strategies, not denial, but redirection. "We're leading the way on player safety," Commissioner Roger Goodell began repeating. As if repetition could rewrite history, new rules were introduced, targeting penalties, independent neurologists, concussion protocols. Helmets were redesigned. Sideline tests became mandatory. On the surface, reform had arrived. But beneath the surface, the old habits persisted. Players still reported being pressured to return too soon. Team doctors still worked under organizational influence, and the culture, the unspoken expectation to play through pain, remained embedded in the sport's DNA. The league's handling of painkillers became another front in its reckoning, as investigations revealed the scale of opioid use within team facilities. The NFL was forced to confront its complicity in addiction. Former players described being given pills like candy, handed bottles without warnings. Studies showed that retired NFL players were 4 times more likely than the general population to misuse prescription painkillers. When the truth broke, the league distanced itself, blaming team physicians and individual practices. Accountability, once again, became a moving target. Public pressure grew. Parents questioned whether they should let their children play. Youth participation in tackle football began to decline. Pop Warner, once the pipeline to the pros, reported record drops. Insurance companies hesitated to underwrite youth leagues. Football, America's most sacred game, was under scrutiny like never before. And yet, the NFL adapted, not through surrender, but through strategy. The league poured millions into marketing campaigns about safer football. It funded research, SPO&SORED brain injury foundations, and built partnerships with advocacy groups. The goal was not transformation, it was optics. Protect the shield had always been the mantra. And in this new era, that meant controlling the narrative as much as the game. When Andrew Luck retired, citing the physical and emotional toll, the reaction from fans and media revealed how deeply the old mindset still ran. Some called him weak. Others questioned his love for the game. The league stayed silent, unwilling to confront the culture that demanded total sacrifice in exchange for fleeting glory. That silence spoke louder than any statement could. Even as CTE cases multiplied from Junior Seau to Vincent Jackson to Demaryius Thomas, the league's response followed a familiar rhythm. Condolences, statements, promises of further research. What it never offered was responsibility. To admit guilt would mean questioning the sport itself and the billion-dollar empire it fuels. Yet, within the storm, there were glimmers of accountability. Some owners began investing in long-term player care programs. The NFLPA pushed for increased pensions and expanded health benefits. Independent researchers gained access to league data. But for every step forward, another step of image management followed. Conferences were hosted, awards given for innovation in safety, but the underlying question remained unanswered. Could the NFL ever truly reform something it profited from sustaining? The lawsuits kept coming. Not just for concussions, but for disability benefits denied, pensions mishandled, and racial bias in settlement evaluations. In 2021, the league faced backlash for using race norming, a practice that assumed black players had lower baseline cognitive function, effectively making it harder for them to qualify for compensation. Under immense pressure, the NFL abandoned the practice and promised equity. But the damage was done. The reckoning was now not just scientific, it was moral and cultural. The league's defenders argue that progress has been made, that players today are safer, more informed, and better protected. There's truth to that. Concussion protocols are stricter. Awareness is higher. Yet, as one retired linebacker put it, the system's not designed to care. It's designed to continue. The game's economics still hinge on risk. Every collision remains a trade between entertainment and endurance. The reckoning is ongoing. Every season, new stars rise. Young men aware of the dangers, but drawn to the glory all the same. They play with the knowledge that the game might take everything, but they play anyway. Because to them, football isn't just a sport. It's identity, escape, and redemption in one. The league knows this. It counts on it. What the NFL can't escape is time. The generation of players who suffered in silence now speak publicly. Their stories ripple across locker rooms, schools, and living rooms. Parents hesitate before signing consent forms. Fans wince when a player doesn't get up. The mythology of invincibility is cracking, replaced by awareness, painful, necessary awareness. The NFL's reckoning isn't about lawsuits or settlements. It's about whether a game that built its empire on toughness can evolve to value vulnerability. Whether a league that once silenced truth can ever be trusted to protect it. Because every time a helmet collides with another, every time a player limps away, and every time a career ends before it should, the echoes of that reckoning return. Some names never made it into documentaries. Some faces never appeared in Hall of Fame tributes. They were the ones who faded quietly. The men who couldn't outrun the toll their bodies and minds took in the game that defined them. You'll find their names scattered in old obituaries, often with phrases like died suddenly or passed unexpectedly. Behind those euphemisms were stories of despair, brain trauma, addiction, and the haunting realization that their best years were spent for a league that forgot them. It's not the legends like Montana or Marino who define the cost. It's the men who never got a proper send-off, who limped into obscurity with knees that wouldn't bend and minds that wouldn't rest. I remember reading about a backup linebacker from the 1980s who ended up living in his car. He had once been the kind of player teammates said would run through a wall. He later admitted he couldn't remember full weeks of his life. When he died alone, a few teammates tried to raise money for a proper burial. The league sent flowers. For many, the end didn't come in a headline. It came in a quiet living room, a gun, a bottle, or a diagnosis too late to matter. Junior Seau's death in 2012 wasn't the first, but it became a turning point. A moment that forced the country to face the brutal truth about what football does to the brain. Seau's family donated his brain to science, and what they found wasn't shocking to doctors anymore. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. The disease that twists memory, emotion, and impulse into something unrecognizable. But even after that, the pattern didn't stop. Every year since, another story emerges. A lineman found dead in his apartment. A former star lost to addiction. A father whose children will grow up reading about him in the past tense. It's a cycle that repeats with the same hollow promise. We'll do better next time. The league now funds studies, releases statements, and promises safety reforms. But the echoes of those lost voices never really fade. They live in the silence between kickoffs, the unspoken reminder that glory has a body count. The psychological aftermath was never part of the contract. These men were trained to hide pain, to play through everything: concussions, fractures, depression. But you can't tape up the mind. You can't ice down the nightmares. Many former players spoke of the isolation, the paranoia, the inability to connect with their families. Some described it as being trapped in a fog that never lifted. They tried therapy, medication, prayer, but for many, the damage was irreversible. The overdoses came next. Prescription pills, opioids, and painkillers were the unholy trinity of survival during and after football. Doctors handed them out like candy in the 90s and early 2000s, numbing bodies that were already being sacrificed weekly. When the prescriptions stopped, the street filled the gap. Heroin, fentanyl, they didn't care what it was called, only that it quieted the ache. By the time the league began addressing the crisis, too many were gone to hear the apology. There's an unspoken ritual at every NFL reunion. The older players scan the crowd, counting who's still around, who's not. One man told me it felt like attending his own funeral every few years, fewer and fewer familiar faces. More names added to the in memoriam reel. These aren't just statistics, they're the sum of lives cut short by a system that once celebrated them. The NFL now pays out settlements for head injuries, but even that, players say, feels transactional. A ledger balancing lives in dollars. Some families fought for years to be recognized in the lawsuit, only to find they didn't qualify under the league's definitions. Others never applied, ashamed or exhausted by the bureaucracy. What they wanted wasn't just money, 'twas acknowledgement. That what killed their loved ones wasn't weakness, it was the game itself. The saddest part. Many still say they'd do it again. That's how deep football runs. They loved the game, even when it didn't love them back. That loyalty, that brotherhood, is both noble and tragic. It's what makes football beautiful and what makes it devastating. When you see a player drop to one knee in prayer after a touchdown, remember, some of those prayers are for the ones who didn't make it. The echoes of silence aren't just from the players lost, but from the ones who remain. The wives who can't recognize their husbands. The children who fear inheriting their father's anger or confusion. The friends who can't talk about what really happened. These are the quiet victims of America's most celebrated sport. Every era has its ghosts, and the modern NFL is haunted by men who gave everything only to be forgotten by the institution that built its empire on their backs. The cheering crowds never hear the whispers of regret that follow a man home from the field. They don't see the nights spent staring at walls or the bottles lined up like trophies of survival. And that's the true darkness. How a league so loud can allow so many to vanish in silence. These men weren't statistics or sacrifices. They were fathers, brothers, and sons who wanted to matter long after the final whistle. The echoes remain, not in the stadiums, but in the spaces between, the homes, the cemeteries. The quiet moments when fans wonder where their heroes went. In the end, the lights always go out. The cheers fade, the helmets come off, and the field empties into silence. What remains isn't glorious memory. A memory carved into bone, embedded in scar tissue, and stored deep within the minds of men who believed in something bigger than themselves. That's the paradox of football. It grants immortality through moments, but it demands mortality through consequence. Every player who's ever suited up knows this bargain. They understand that the game doesn't give without taking. A knee that never heals. A hand that can't quite close. A night spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if the world outside the stadium ever truly saw them as more than armor. Yet they chase at the noise, the pride, the belonging. For a few years, they live as giants in a country that worships the spectacle of power. And then, they're gone. Football, at its core, is America distilled ambition, violence, resilience, and denial. It's a game where pain is celebrated, where sacrifice is a virtue, and where silence becomes the only acceptable language for suffering. We love the hits, the comebacks, the cinematic arcs of redemption. But we rarely stop to ask, redemption from what? or at what cost. There's an uncomfortable truth that lingers behind every highlight reel. The men who built this empire are breaking beneath it. Their bodies become archives of pain. Their memories, fractured documentaries of who they once were. And yet, somehow, the myth continues, because we need it too. The NFL isn't just a league, it's a reflection of what we value as a culture. Strength over vulnerability, performance over peace, spectacle over truth. The phrase playing hurt has become a badge of honor. But what happens when the hurt never ends? When the body becomes a prison and the applause becomes a ghost? That's the quiet tragedy the league rarely confronts. It's easier to glorify toughness than to confront trauma. Easier to tell the story of resilience than the story of repair. The league likes to talk about legacy of heroes, dynasties, and traditions. But true legacy isn't measured in rings or records. It's measured in how you treat those who gave you everything. For too long, the NFL treated its former players like expendable parts in a machine that could never stop turning. Lawsuits forced some accountability, yes. But accountability is not compassion. Settlements are not justice. The question now isn't whether football can survive its own brutality, it's whether it can evolve. Can a sport built on collision learn empathy? Can a culture addicted to violence learn to value preservation over performance? Maybe that's the next great experiment. Not in biomechanics or helmet design, but in humanity. Because beneath every number and jersey, there was always a person. A man who once believed that if he just hit harder, ran faster, endured longer, he'd earn his place in history. Many did, but many more disappeared into the margins and written names who made the legends possible. The league's future depends on whether it can finally see them, not as statistics, but as sons, fathers, brothers, fragile, mortal, real. Somewhere tonight, a young boy is dreaming of the NFL. He's watching old highlight tapes, imagining his name being called on draft day. He doesn't see the cost yet, he only sees the glory. And maybe that's the point. Every generation forgets the pain to chase the dream. That's how the cycle survives. But maybe one day, the game can be both glorious and humane. Maybe one day, toughness will mean honesty, and strength will mean survival. That's the evolution football still owes itself. Not rule changes, not PR campaigns, but truth. The fragile immortality of football lies not in its champions, but in its willingness to confront what it's broken. To listen to the echoes of silence, to honor the fallen not just with moments of silence, but with moments of change. Only then can the sport truly transcend its violence and become what it always pretended to be. A testament to the human spirit, not a monument to its destruction. Because in the end, the greatest victory won't be on the scoreboard. It'll be when the men who built the game can finally rest knowing that their sacrifices meant something more than ratings, more than trophies. Something eternal. The body breaks. The mind forgets. The fame fades. But the truth endures. And maybe, at long last, that's what real immortality looks like.